Hey, welcome back to Preshift with Dylan Higgins. So, beverage training. Um, there's going to be a whole lot of time to go over a lot of things. Um, but one of the things that I think is really super important about being the person on the floor who can discuss these things with your guests, or um, one of the people on the floor who might be able to impart this information to your fellow staff, is the ability to synthesize the information that's coming in. So to that point, um, we're going to discuss one of the more seemingly difficult concepts to work out in terms of beverage training, and that is that is discussing the physical structure of beverages. The easiest one to discuss is going to be wine, because generally speaking, still wine possesses all the things that we're talking about, and doesn't have the added confusions of effervescence like a lot of beers or ciders do, or champagne, sparkling wine, and is not specifically designed to have a higher ethanol content. And so, because of that, I'm going to use describing the structure of a wine as the best sort of jumping off point. We can get into discussion of how to describe the structure of, say, a whiskey or vodka as we go along, but those are, again, those require that you have the basis of understanding from here. So we're going to start with structure of wine. Structure of wine, again, there are two primary concepts when it comes to describing a wine. One is the physical structure of the wine, and there's several components to that. We'll get into those. The other are the aromatic components. The aromatic components of a wine make up most of what we discuss when we're talking about flavor. So when you're talking about a fruit, or the quality of a fruit, or vanilla and buttery notes and things along those lines, a lot of the time we're actually discussing the aromatics of a wine as opposed to the physical structure of a wine. The aromatics of a wine are super important, and it's definitely a thing that we will get into, and it has merit for all conversation. But without knowing the physical structure of a wine, pairing becomes a lot more difficult. And then subsequently, learning how those aromatics come about it can be beneficial to understand the structure as well. So all that being said, there are basically the chemical process by which we derive an alcoholic beverage is we start with a sugar-rich liquid. In the event that we're talking about wine, that's grape juice. You take grape juice and you introduce yeast. Yeast's job is to break down the glucose that's in that sugar-rich fluid and convert it to ethanol. They're not 100% efficient, so they only get some of it done. Plus, ethanol eventually kills them off, and they also produce heat while they're doing this. So the amount of sugar remaining in a wine contributes to the structure in the form of sweetness. The amount of alcohol that's been converted out of that sugar, out of the other sugar that's gone now, into the wine, contributes to the structure in the form of alcohol. And those are, by virtue of their nature, opposing forces within the actual structure of the fluid that winds up being the alcoholic beverage we consume. So we need to talk about those. Additionally, all fruit juices possess acid of some sort, mostly malic, citric, and at some point acetic acid. So acidity is a huge part of the conversation regarding structure. And then, because acid really, as much as people discuss the difference between the smell of a lemon and the smell of a peach or something along those lines, the acids are actually pretty similar, and most of the remaining aromatic changes are due to very subtle chemical differences between those things. So really, we're talking about the base acidity of something, and when we're talking about the base acidity of a fruit juice, usually we're discussing citric acid. And then the next major component is going to be tannins. Especially in red wines, tannins are generally tannins are a sort of like a chemical warfare element of plant life. All plant life eventually gets consumed by some form of animal life, and as a result, in order to complete their life cycle as much as possible, they develop defense systems. We all do. Some of those defense systems include chemicals that actually cause an astringent response in your palate to make it unpleasant to eat. Those chemicals are tannins. So those exist in the seeds, in the skins, in the stems, and to a lesser extent the flesh itself. So that's another one of the components we need to investigate. All right, so let's start from the beginning. Sugar and alcohol. So sugar and alcohol, sweetness and alcohol. When we're describing a wine, it's actually a pretty small amount of sugar necessary for your tongue to be able to perceive it. As a result, when we say things like that is a sweet wine, usually that's somewhere in the neighborhood of like 4 or 4.5 grams of actual processed sugar still in every liter of fluid. So we're talking, very small amounts of sugar in a pretty sizable amount of solution. The contrary to that is alcohol. And in alcohol, when we talk about something being a high alcohol wine, we talk about probably 15-ish%, 14.5% alcohol by volume, which again relates to in a liter, 14% of a liter is 14 centiliters or 140 milliliters, which works out to something like 7 ounces. If I'm doing my math right on that, I could be wrong. Anyway, so if you're looking at it from that perspective, again, a very small percentage of what's happening inside of that solution is actually alcohol. So where are we going with this? You have the ability to perceive these things in your body is very specifically attuned to alcohol and sugar. Why? You need sugar to be able to continue living. That's the basis of life. So since you need sugar to be able to continue living, your body is attuned to be able to sense when you are consuming sugar. When we talk about alcohol's a solution, and it's a poisoning in excess. So your body is attuned to be very specifically aware of when there's too much alcohol in the system. Also, chemically structurally, ethanol is very similar to glucose. They're made of the exact same carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, that just organized a little differently. So your body is going to pick those things up. So there we go, alcohol and acidity. On tannin, your body, again, very attuned to pick these things up because it's made chemically with the intent to keep you from eating too much. So we use tannin in red wines specifically to balance out overtly fruity wines, or to allow a greater length of aging window and that kind of thing. And it does work in that regard. It is I'll have to double check if it's actually an antioxidant, but it definitely slows the aging process for a wine. So that's why we keep tannin in red wines. And then we have to talk about acidity. And acidity is, again, an element that maintains freshness in wine. The chemical nature of citric acid is such that the interaction of oxygen actually does oxidize the wine over time and reduces the perceptible acidity as we go. Your body is again designed to taste acidity, specifically because too much acid can cause your stomach to be upset. Your stomach is a largely acidic environment, so adding more acid can hurt that. Anyway, so let's see. So we've gone over alcohol, acidity, tannin, sweetness, and we'll go over some of the processes that contribute to these things next time. But I hope all's well. I hope you guys have a great service tonight, and I'll talk to you soon.